it says. Thank you. You're on the East Coast, so it's 10:05 p.m. And at any age, that's late to be starting to give a lecture. I really, really appreciate it. We really appreciate that you're doing this. I'll say, it's hard for me to put into words what I feel about this man. Maybe I should take you off screen so you don't blush. But I'm just so, I'd say, enamored and in awe. Enamored of you as a human being, and in awe of what you've done in your lifetime. Incredible. You'll hear Wendy will read Rabbi Jack Bemporad's bio, but just know that I'd love you to go to the Center for Interreligious Understanding, and I'm going to tell you the website address. I don't have it. Is it ciu.org, Jack?
ciunow.org.
ciunow.org. Take the time. It doesn't have to be tonight, but read his entire bio. It'll take a little longer than what you'll hear tonight, but it's important. So you hear the detail of his achievements, the important work that he's done. Wendy Levenson, we're back. We're back on air with our Rabbi in Residence program that you initiated and that you've managed the whole time. Last year, it was really successful and very important, and the kind of depth of learning that we had. I think about the different rabbis and different teachings. They were really diverse and all interesting. So we begin this year together again. So what I want to say to everybody on Zoom, a little Zoom protocol. It's a webinar, so we see your names, but we don't see your faces. We don't see you, so don't worry about sound. What I will say is, I want to recommend, I'm going to spotlight a speaker, which means that you should only see, let's say, Rabbi Jack when he speaks right now. Let me see if I can spotlight myself. Okay, now you should only see my screen. If somebody says you see everyone, let me know and I'll see what I can do. What I'd like to say to you is, if you want to ask questions, don't wait till the Q&A. It won't interrupt us or disturb us. If you want to use either chat at the bottom, which some of you have used, or a Q&A, and we'll make time. Rabbi Jack said he won't go to sleep till 1 a.m. So with the time of the day there in mind, I want to turn to Wendy. Wendy, I'm going to spotlight you so you can make your introductory remarks.
Thank you so much, Rabbi Li-Paz. It's my pleasure to welcome you all back to our Rabbi in Residence lecture series. You are in for a special treat tonight. Rabbi Jack Bemporad is the director of the nonprofit Center for Interreligious Understanding, which he founded in 1992. Its aim is to bring people of all religious faiths together to promote open dialogue, mutual respect, and theological understanding of the common foundations shared by the world's religions. Rabbi Bemporad began teaching at Vatican University in 1998 and has been the director of the John Paul II Center and professor of interreligious studies since 2009. Concurrently, he also serves as rabbi of Congregation Micah in New Jersey. Fleeing the fascist takeover in Italy prior to World War II, Rabbi Bemporad and his family traveled to the US when he was 5 years old, thus having personally suffered as the result of persecution and prejudice. He has dedicated his career to improving relations among Christians, Muslims, and Jews worldwide. Rabbi Bemporad is recognized internationally for his diplomatic skill and leadership in matters of religious understanding and reconciliation. He is one of the rare Jewish leaders to have had a personal audience with Pope John XXIII, numerous personal audiences with Pope John Paul II, and was one of 3 rabbis to have blessed the Pope shortly before his death. Rabbi Bemporad was the chief writer of the Prague Accord, the historical turning point when the Catholic Church asked forgiveness for acts of anti-Judaism and anti-Semitism. Soon after, every European Catholic archdiocese asked forgiveness for past acts of anti-Semitism. In addition to heading programs that build bridges among faiths, Rabbi Bemporad continues to speak both in the US and abroad, and we are so privileged to have him here with us tonight. Welcome, Rabbi Bemporad.
Wendy, thank you so much. I'm very, very pleased to be with you. I have such admiration and respect for Rabbi Li-Paz, and over the time that we've worked together and spoke to each other, and he in fact participated in our conferences, I've grown to really see the great value that he has to offer, not just to your congregation, but I would say the interreligious community and to the Jewish people in this country and throughout the world. So for me, it's a great privilege to be here with you and with Rabbi Li-Paz because of my tremendous esteem and respect that I have for him as a human being, as a rabbi, and also as someone who's so dedicated to making sure that religions work together in harmony. Now, the topic that I'm going to be discussing is actually John Paul II. Now, keep in mind that John Paul II became a saint. He wasn't just a pope, he was sainted. And you have to recognize that when he died, I think in 2005, there were 4 million people that came to his funeral. I can't think of another person, at least without investigating it, that had that many people coming to a funeral. Part of it, I think, had something to do with the kind of a man he was. He was extraordinarily charismatic. Now, what does that mean to be charismatic? We speak about charisma, which, you know, in Greek, the word charisma means gift. And he had this special gift that when he walked into a room and he spoke, sometimes he spoke before thousands of people. Sometimes there was just a small group of us meeting with him. He actually came across as if he was speaking to every single individual. You had no sense that he was speaking to a group. You had this feeling that he was speaking to you and understood you. And this was, it seems to me, the real key to his great success. Because, you know, people think that what they want is to be praised. Of course, they like to know if their name is in the paper or if they're mentioned, you know, in some response, in some email or something. But that really isn't true. What people really want is to be seen, to be understood, to be known. A person wants to understand another person's inner struggles, inner longings. And here I think what John Paul II was able to do was to convey that, not just to the Catholics, which he did for 20 years, but really to the Jewish community. In fact, I would say that the Jewish community felt that he understood them. Now, why is that? Well, there are reasons for it. The first reason is that he actually grew up in Poland, in a city that had a large percentage of Jews. He said a quarter of the students that were in his elementary school were Jewish, a quarter. Very often he and his close friend, Jerzy Kluger, would go to synagogue. So here you have a pope who as a child went to synagogue with his friends. In fact, one of the things that he had constant longing for was that childhood, when he had Jewish friends. He even had a young woman who was very close to him, who came to him and said, you know, of all the people here, many of them were anti-Semitic and didn't treat us well, except you and your father. You really understand us. And 50 years later, when he was in Israel and spoke there, she was there and they were reunited And it was one of the most ecstatic experiences of his life, which he recounts and tells. So here's a man who, as a young man, really suffered and understood suffering. Why did he? Well, his mother died when he was between 8 and 9 years of age. And so a good part of his childhood, he would go home, and guess who was there to give him a piece of bread with marmalade and a glass of milk? It was the Jewish landlady who owned the apartment that he and his father rented. And so from the time he was a child, he had the care of someone who was Jewish. In fact, when I met with him, because I gave a talk for the 25th anniversary of Vatican II, and the two of us had a chance to speak. And I said to him, why is it that of all popes, you have done everything you could to bring us closer to really understand the suffering of the Jewish people? He said, well, I had a lot of suffering in my life. Not only did my mother die, my brother died when I was 13. I was so close to him. My father died when I was 20. When I was 20, I recognized that I had lost everyone that was dear to me in the world. But even more than that, he was hit by a truck. Something hit him. One of the reasons he walked with one shoulder a little lower than the other was because of the accident. But really, most of all, he said, when I was a student at the university, the Nazis came. He was 19 years old. The Nazis came. They took the Jewish teachers and killed them. And he said to us, by the way, Ron, David Rosen was there. And he said to us, I've made a promise to myself that if I'm ever in a situation where I can do something to alleviate Jewish suffering, I will. Keep in mind, he was in Poland. 6 million Poles were killed. 3 million Jews and 3 million non-Jews. He was actually there during the Nazi conquest, and he had to hide from the Nazis. He was there during the Communist Conference, and he once said to us, he said, you know what the virtue of tragedy is? The virtue for tragedy is courage. That what you have to do is you have to take on a courage, a determination that you can overcome it. But interestingly enough, what he was able to do, since he understood Jews and he understood Jewish suffering, he understood that there were 3 main issues that the Jewish community and the Jewish people were deeply concerned about. And they were not going to have any dialogue unless those 3 issues were confronted. The first issue, first and foremost, was anti-Semitism. Unless the church recognizes and is willing to confront its own anti-Semitism, its own teachings that have in many ways led to anti-Semitic actions and beliefs, what are we going to talk about? It's for this reason that Soloveitchik, in a very important article called Confrontation, which he published in Tradition in 1964, the year before Vatican II, which changed everything, he said, as long as the religion of the many lords it over the religion of the few and treats us like subhuman species, there's no point having interreligious dialogue. We can unite in terms of social action, but when it comes to theology, when it comes to philosophy, there's no point, you see. So the first thing that the Jewish community was concerned about was, how does any religious group deal with the great and intense suffering, not just of the Holocaust, that's important, but what about all the past suffering? What are you doing with things about the Crusades, the blood libel, the Inquisition? Are we going to act like that never happened? What are we going to do about that? So the Jewish community was very wary about any real approach on the part of Catholics or others with respect to dialogue. Now, if I had more time, I would go into this in much, much greater detail. But let me tell you the other two things that the Jewish community was deeply concerned about. The second thing had to do with conversion, missionizing. How can you, on the one hand, say, you're our dearly elder brother, we're reaching out a hand of friendship and collaboration with one hand, and another hand saying, you come close and accept Christ? That won't work. And one of the reasons, by the way, that the Jewish community at the beginning, before Vatican II, had a problem with that, because some of the Protestants, the liberal Protestants, were willing to say, the Jews are not collectively responsible for the death of Jesus, but we can't give up missionizing. We can't give up what Matthew calls, the great task of converting the world to Christ. So somehow we had to deal with that problem. There's a third problem, which really became a very thorny problem, and to some extent still is a thorny problem. And that is, what do you do with Israel? What do you do with the Jewish people in Israel? What do you do with the fact that the land of Israel absorbed so many of the people that survived in the concentration camps and in the internment camps, the refugee camps that went to Israel to struggle for Israel to just breathe in the face of intolerable suffering? So this is the interesting thing. No one, and here I'm speaking clearly, no one understood, as John Paul II did, that these were the three fundamental issues that he had to confront in his papacy if his dialogue and outreach to the Jewish people were to seem that it was somehow honest, that it was somehow authentic, that it was really true. Now, it's interesting that when he came back to Poland and he met with the Jewish people in Poland, Jewish community, I'd like to read to you what he says. It may be a little long, but it's important for you to hear what he had to say. He said, be sure, dear brothers, that the Poles, this Polish church, is in a spirit of profound solidarity with you when she looks closely at the terrible reality of the extermination, the unconditional extermination of your people, an extermination carried out with premeditation. It was you who suffered this terrible sacrifice of extermination. Above all, because of this terrible experience through which you have become a loud warning voice to all humanity, for all nations, all powers in this world, more than anyone else, it is precisely you who have become this warning, this saving warning. I thought in this sense, you continue your particular vocation, showing yourselves to be still the heirs of that election to which God is faithful. I can continue. It's long. I wish I had the time to go over this with you. But the interesting thing here is he showed them that he knew how they suffered. And the first thing he wanted to do, interestingly enough, is to say it's not enough to just say that we know you're suffering. He went further. He said we have to ask forgiveness. We have to ask forgiveness of the Jewish community for what Catholics have. I can go into this in detail. I don't have the time for it. But it's interesting that he commissioned Cardinal Cassidy in Prague in 1990 to get up and say that what Christians have done in the past demands that we ask forgiveness. And he even used the Hebrew word teshuva. Teshuva. What makes me very, very happy that this happened, I happened to write the Prague Accord, which is where that actually was written and published. And it's all over. If you go to the Vatican website, you'll see it. The Prague Accord of 1990 was when the Catholic Church, for the first time ask forgiveness for anything that Catholics may have done that brought about anti-Judaism and anti-Semitism. And every single Catholic conference, bishops' conference in Europe copied it. The first one to do it was Poland. Then after that, every single European nation. And you have this book, Catholics Remember the Holocaust, which is a marvelous book, which actually gives the document we remember, a reflection on the Shoah, and the statement of every single European nation that engaged in anti-Judaism and anti-Semitism. Asking what? Asking forgiveness. Now, if we are concerned with how honest they are about it, I can tell you they're very honest. And not only that, what I find most interesting, I think, Ron, you and I spoke about this, is that the present Pope has taken this to heart. Not only did the Pope, in a book that I wrote the chapter on Genesis, he wrote the introduction. In that introduction, he goes back to what the need to ask forgiveness. But what is interesting, it's been generalized. So that in his recent visit to Greece, when he met with the head of the Orthodox Church, he came and he said, I come to you in humility, asking forgiveness for whatever Catholics may have done to bring about the divisions between the Catholic Church and the Orthodox Church. So what happened with what John Paul initiated became something that now is a time when we really have to ask, so that in the year 2000, it was the genius of John Paul II that he said, at this time, at the millennium, we have to have a service of repentance. So guess what you had? You had the head of Pontifical Commission for the Sciences ask forgiveness for what they did with Galileo. You had Cardinal Rinzi, who was Black, who was the head of the Interreligious Conference, ask forgiveness for what the church did to the Blacks. You had Cassidy ask forgiveness for what the church did to the Jews. A whole service of repentance in the year 2000 in St. Peter's in Rome. And in that particular meeting, this is what the Pope said. Now, what is interesting about it, I'm going to read it in a minute, is that when he went to Jerusalem and he went to the wall, Cassidy told me afterwards, when he went to the wall, he pushed everybody aside and he hobbled, he could barely walk to the wall, and he took a piece of paper and he put it in the wall and he read what was on that piece of paper. And this is what it said. God of our fathers, you chose Abraham and his descendants to bring your name to the nations. We're deeply saddened by the behavior of those who, in the course of history, have caused these children of yours to suffer. And asking your forgiveness, we wish to commit ourselves to genuine brotherhood with the people of the covenant. Not the covenant that was, not the covenant that was superseded, not the covenant that became simply a fossil. On the contrary, the covenant that still exists, so much so that wherever he went, over 100 nations, and he met with whatever Jewish community was there, he always repeated the chapter from Paul's letter to the Romans, chapter 11, 28, 29 verse, where he says that the gifts and the calls of God are irrevocable. You cannot read the Bible and act as if it's passé or superseded. And not only that, later in a magnificent document, I wrote at length on it, in the biblical document, he said, it's an amazing document. It was John Paul's idea to do this. basically is that the interpretations that the Jewish community have given to these texts are valid. You can't simply say that you can only read the Hebrew Bible in the light of the New. On the contrary, you have to read it in the light of what the Jewish tradition and the Jewish genius have made out of those texts. Well, so I think that without question, he made it very clear on the issue of anti-Semitism and forgiveness. Well, the second thing he did, which is very important, because the whole foundation for this was Nostra Aetate. But Nostra Aetate, well, what status does it have? It's a pontifical document. It's a document of the Second Vatican Council, but he gave it a very special significance. He says, the declaration Nostra Aetate, I'm quoting him now, remains always for us, for the Catholic Church, for the episcopate, and for the Pope, a teaching which must be followed, a teaching which it is necessary to accept, not merely as something fitting, but much more as an expression of the faith and as an inspiration of the Holy Spirit, as a word of divine wisdom. He gave it the status of being an expression of the Holy Spirit and divine wisdom. This is unparalleled, because it meant that you can't change this Vatican II. You can't change these documents. You can't change Nostra Aetate, which came out with all the statements recognizing Judaism and the Jewish people. Well, what about the issue of the conversion? Well, you know, it's interesting that if you really say, as he said over and over and over again, that the calls and the gifts of God to the Jews are irrevocable, well, there's no point going and converting anybody, because their religion is a legitimate, authentic religion. So what he did is he basically said, yes, if Jews feel that they want to accept Christ, that's their decision, but we're not going to do anything to in any way advance that. If anything, let them lead a life that non-Catholics would want to emulate. Now, he didn't in any way deny that this is a teaching of the church. He didn't in any way deny that this is the way the church interpreted. What he did affirm is that it is not the only way. And when he came out with the catechism, which was another transformation, he brought out a catechism that was translated into 80 languages, sent throughout the world. And in that catechism, it says, is there salvation outside of the church? And guess what the answer is? The answer is yes. If a person in honesty leads a moral life, he is saved. Which I found curious, because as Ron knows, this is a teaching of the Tosefta 2 years ago, where it says, 2,000 years ago, that the righteous of all nations have a place in the world to come. Come to it a little late, but you come to it, okay? But what was very interesting, it was when he was a Monsignor, a woman brought a young child to him, and I want to read to you what the journalist Lorenzo Gulli, in a magnificent book, wrote. He said, when John Paul was a priest, a young child by the name of Shakni was brought to him to be baptized. He refused, since it was a Jewish child and his parents had entrusted him to this Christian couple named Yakovich, with the express wish that he be reunited with his Jewish relatives in the case of their death. Many years later, Mrs. Yakovich wrote a letter to Shakti saying, I sought to baptize you and raise you as a Catholic, but a young priest prevented me. The priest became a bishop, then a cardinal, and now recently has been elected pope. But the priest did, he says, let's look and see if he's got relatives in Israel. They reunited him with the relatives, and it turns out he was in Stamford, Connecticut, and was in the congregation that I was there once giving a talk, and he introduced himself to me. Is that amazing? The chief rabbi of Bluzau, when he learned of this story, said the following. Listen to this. He said, the ways of God are merciful, marvelous, and unknown to men. Perhaps it was the merit to have saved this Jewish child that has led him to his becoming, Pope. Now, what about the third thing? What about Israel? You know, when Paul VI went to Israel, he never mentioned the name Israel. He mentioned the name the Holy Land, and he mentioned the name Jerusalem. The first pope to really mention Israel was John Paul II. And he said it over and over again. Let me just read to you what he says. He says, for the Jewish people who live in the state of Israel and who preserve in that land such precious testimonies to their history and their faith, we must ask for the desired security and due tranquility that is the prerogative of every nation and condition of his life and of progress for every society. He was very clear on this, and he worked very hard for the full diplomatic relationship between Israel and the Holy See. And I remember when the first ambassador from Israel presented his credentials to the Pope, he said, I read what he said. He said, who would have believed it? Who would have believed it? That now Israel is a nation. Israel is strong and vibrant and has full diplomatic relations with the Vatican. Who would have believed it? I mean, this sense of, I think that, you know, I could go on and on and on. I just finished a class that I've taught now for the last 3 months in Rome on John Paul II. So I have tons of stuff, and they're too much, as a matter of fact, because it's so hard to pick. You know, I've picked certain things, but it's very hard. Let me say, though, that he's more than just something for the Jews. He's something for the world, and he did everything he could for peace. My dear friend Tony Schwartz, who did the famous Daisy ad, I don't know if you remember that ad against when he ran for President Johnson. The Pope did ads in the United States against nuclear testing. And Cardinal Fitzgerald, who's a dear friend and a wonderful, wonderful man, recently in a talk he said about the Pope, he condemned the first Gulf War. He opposed sanctions against Iraq and Libya. He never ceased to speak on behalf of Lebanon. When he called a message for mankind, and already in 1989, he took the unusual step of writing a letter to all Muslims about the issue. He appealed to an end of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, appealing to both Netanyahu and Arafat. He tried to prevent the invasion of Iraq, sending cardinals to plead with Saddam Hussein and George Bush. Surely it is this action that brought so many Muslim leaders to attend his funeral and many more to send letters of condolence. This is a man that was larger than life. This is a man who in a lifetime achieved so much, and so much of what he's done, like the Catechism, the Pontifical Document, the We Remember document, the engagement with all these cases, he really has become a source of such tremendous joy to so many of us. I want to conclude. I don't know whether I can really, I want to conclude with 2 readings. One, I'm going to quote what he said when he went to Hiroshima. He went to Hiroshima, and he was there at the memorial for Hiroshima. And he said, to those who believe in God, I say, let us be strong in his strength that infinitely surpasses our own. Let us be united in the knowledge that he calls us to unity. Let us be aware that love and sharing are not faraway ideals, but the road to enduring peace, the peace of God. And to the creator of nature and man, of truth and beauty, I say, hear my voice, for it is the voice of the victims of all wars and violence among individuals and nations. Hear my voice, for it is the voice of all children who suffer and will suffer when people put their faith in weapons and war. Hear my voice when I beg you to instill into the hearts of all human beings the wisdom of peace, the strength of justice, and the joy of fellowship. Hear my voice, for I speak for the multitudes in every country and in every period of history who do not want war and are ready to walk the road of peace. Hear my voice and grant insight and strength so that we may always respond to hatred with love, to injustice with total dedication to justice, to need with the sharing of self, war with peace. Oh God, hear my voice and grant unto the world your everlasting peace. Let me just quote the exact opposite, if you don't mind. I don't know if any of you have read the table talk of Hitler. In his table talk, it was reported, he used to talk to his generals and to his colleagues. I'd like to quote to you the exact opposite of everything I've said tonight. Here's what he said. This is Hitler speaking. We are now at the end of the age of reason. The intellect has become a disease of life. Our revolution is not merely political or social. We are at the outset of a tremendous overthrow, an overthrow of moral ideas, and of man's spiritual orientation. The tablets of Mount Sinai have lost their validity. Conscience is the Jewish invention. Like circumcision, it mutilates man. There is no such thing as truth. One must distrust mind and conscience. One must place one's trust in one's instincts. No wonder he hated Judaism, because it represented everything he was against. And that's really the issue. John Paul II understood that. He understood what Nazism was. He understood what communism was. He lived under both. He knew that that's exactly what Hitler would have done had he won. And he dedicated his life going throughout the world to seek peace and pursue it, and to act in a way that made everyone realize the authentic person who lived a life of faith and trust and hope. And I feel really privileged that I had so many audiences with him. Especially privileged that when I met him in Rome after we spent the evening in Denver, he says, Jack, thank you so much to come and visit me. Amazing.
I was just about to say that I'm so moved listening to you, not only by the content of what you shared about essentially, sharing, call it channeling the wisdom and inspiration and holiness of this Pope, but also I'm so moved by how you're moved. Clearly not only inspired by what he did and said in his lifetime and in his leadership, but clearly there is a visceral memory of the man that you have as well that none of us have the privilege of. You've said to me, and we've talked about the big task of religion now and in the future, and we only need to look at today's newspapers to ask ourselves what the problems are. But first of all, I was struck by the juxtaposition, his words and then Hitler's. It's just so shocking. And you realize the power of words, right? The power of words to do good or to create such utter destruction.
Right.
You've spoken of religion as being the conscience of the people. And it seems to me that Pope John Paul II represented and communicated the conscience of the people, not only Catholic people, but the people, essentially God's people, all people recognizing themselves as created in the image of God.
Yes, I said that the religion must become the conscience of society and the voice for humanity. You have billions of people who are religious. And if these religions would really take seriously what their teachings say about doing justice and loving mercy and walking humbly, as Micah says, or to see good and not evil, as Amos says, or to beat that nation shall beat their swords into plowshares, right? And not be accustomed to war anymore. If we would take these virtues, these teachings seriously, the world would change. And that's the task, it seems to me, of interreligious dialogue and interreligious understanding, which is what I've devoted myself to, I would say, at least for the last 50 years.
I wanted to
60.
ask you about that. In addition to, people may have questions, please use the Q&A or the chat, and I have one, so I'll ask you in a moment. I'll look at that, Barbara. For this recording, yes, I'll make sure that everybody has a recording. Wendy and I will get it out to you this week, but so you can watch it again and share it, maybe discuss it as well. But what brought you to this work? You were a congregational rabbi. I know your history. What turned you in this direction? Because I know you did both. You were a congregational rabbi as well as a leader in interreligious dialogue. How did you, what's the turning point that turned you in the direction of this work?
Well, I became a member of the Synagogue Council of America. I got on their board largely because I had done a lot of work. I've always taught in non-Jew. Not only did I teach in rabbinical school, I also taught in Catholic universities. And I was very, very much interested in interreligious dialogue. But what happened was that when the Pope was going to come to the United States in '87, the Orthodox actually vetoed it and said that they would not participate. And unfortunately, the rules of the Synagogue Council were such that if one of the agencies vetoed it, the others had to go along. So they were very concerned. And since they knew that I had been in Italy and that I had met with John the 23rd, and I was acquainted with the Vatican, and I spoke Italian, they said, well, why don't you go and talk to Cardinal Willibrand and see if you can do something so that we can have a meeting. So what happened was I met with him and I said, I don't expect the Pope to actually apologize, but I think that there should be some statement on your side that would make it possible for us to have this meeting. I said it would be a terrible embarrassment if he comes and the religious element of the community isn't going to be there. I'm sure the Anti-Defamation League would have gone, the American Jewish Committee, B'nai B'rith, and all that. And he said, and by the way, Willibrand was one of the great men, truly a great man. He actually said, well, what if we say that faux pas have been made, that false steps have been taken? So when I went back to New York and said, this is what they're willing to say, the Orthodox, instead of vetoing it, they just said they wouldn't participate. But that didn't mean that everybody else is in that '87 meeting. And then they elected me as chairman of the Interreligious Affairs Committee of the Synagogue Council, which was the secretariat of ICHKIC, the International Jewish Committee for Inter. And from '87 to '92, I actually engaged in all of the meetings with all of the cardinals. I brought them to Auschwitz twice, and we had tremendous amount. I worked on many of these texts, you see. And
you mentioned bringing cardinals to Auschwitz. I know I'm taking us away from the Catholic realm for a moment, but can you talk a little about the trips you made with imams, Muslim leaders to Auschwitz, and what the impact was?
Well, I felt that one of the best ways of dealing with Holocaust denial among many of the imams is to take those imams that actually said explicitly that the Holocaust was an exaggeration or that it was a movie set, that it really didn't exist. So I said, well, I'll tell you what, why don't we go and see together? Let's take a look. And I said, I'll pay your way. And they said, really? Now, it's interesting because I was attacked. Steve Emerson attacked me, said, how can you even talk to these people? You know, the ADL reaped vengeance on me. They say, how in the world Can you in any way invite these people? We have nothing but contempt for them. And I said, look, if you invite people who believe there was a Holocaust, what good does that do? Let's invite some that don't. Now, we sort of loaded to death because there was just a few that denied it. The vast majority were very to affirm it, but I even did a video, I'll send it if you want, with the guy who was the chief person who denied the Holocaust. He took it all back.
Wasn't he from the Palestinian territories?
No, that was the second trip.
Okay.
The second trip, we had it with the world imams, and we invited this imam. I don't remember his name. Do you remember his name from anyhow, he came and he said, I have a video saying this too. He said, if the Palestinians had experienced this, they would have a totally different view of Israel. The sad thing is that when he went back, he was beaten up and had to go to the hospital for even coming to Auschwitz with us. But I felt the best way to actually combat Holocaust denial is to get imams both in this country and throughout the world to go there. And I say, look, all this happened before Israel. It has nothing to do with Israel. The only question is, do you trust what your eyes see and what your ears hear? We had, for instance, the guy who was the photographer for Mengele. And he testified to what he was doing. We had survivors, and you saw you can't, I mean, it's something that just is overwhelming. And it was very interesting because that night there was a bunch of cardinals and we spent the evening talking about the book of Job, which I thought was very symbolic.
Jack, you've quoted any number of great sources in history and in liturgy and in literature and in biblical text when you and I have conversations. But it seems that so much of your dedication has been to Catholic. So much of your life's work has been not to one of the rabbis or rabbinic organizations, but to the Vatican, and in particular to the unique relationship between Pope John Paul II and the Catholics and the Jews that I think you believe have a unique relationship among the religions. Do you want to just
Yes. Well, I
I
think one can't deny that it was the Catholic Church that came out with the Vatican II and the document Nostra Aetate, which is the foundation, really, for all genuine dialogue. And to the extent that you have the Protestants going along, I have in the other room, and I have a file on all the Protestant statements. And these statements really are based in large measure on the Catholic statement. Let me just give you the most recent, which is very important. I don't know if I sent you the liturgy of the Orthodox Church.
Yes, yeah.
The Christian Orthodox Church, right?
Right.
For Holy Week. It is viciously anti-Semitic. And we've been working with the Orthodox, the Christian Orthodox. Well, just last year, the American Christian Orthodox came out with a statement that is fabulous. And if you look at that statement, I don't know if I sent it to you. If I haven't, I will send it to you. I'll send you the liturgy plus the statement. It is almost word for word out of Vatican II.
Amazing.
You see?
Yeah, incredible.
See what
so
I mean?
There is influence. It does have more reach, even than Rome and even than the Catholic Church, and even than a particular man in his lifetime. How do you translate, or how do you see the transference of the values of Pope John Paul II to Pope Francis?
Well, I think that the Catholic Church is now in many ways in crisis, because there are a lot of people who feel that what John Paul II did was go too far, that one has to go back to its roots. One has to go back to the Catholic Church, which was pre-Vatican II. And that is, now I think Pope Francis has the best intentions of wanting to preserve. Repeatedly, he says, for example, just recently, he actually prohibited the use of the pre-Vatican II liturgy. Going back to Latin liturgy, he said, I'm sorry, we have to abide by Vatican II. And everywhere he goes, he reaffirms it. But as much as I admire Pope Francis, and the one time that we had a chance really to talk, not just, a photo, I have the feeling that his dedication really is to social justice issues, not theological issues. He's not a theologian. He's not a philosopher. His main concern is, what do you do about people who are poor and sick and homeless and fragile and people who have to leave their home and go somewhere else? What can we do about it? Which is largely to his credit. There's no question about that. But you need a little bit more than that. You need someone who has great sophistication theologically and philosophically. Keep in mind that John Paul II was a philosopher. He wasn't even a theologian. He was a philosopher. There's a big difference. And the difference is that a philosopher doesn't have any real presuppositions. Everything is a subject of questioning. A theologian has two fundamental presuppositions where you spend your time trying to defend: God and revelation. John Paul II believed in God and revelation, but he said you can't start there. You have to start with the reason. And that's why in his great encyclical on reason and faith, he says reason and faith are like two wings on a bird. And if you get rid of one, the bird is not going to be able to fly. So you can't get rid of reason. And what reason means is inquiry, questioning. And that's so Jewish. I mean, what if there is anything about Jew, they always say, let me just tell you one story. Do we have time for a story?
Yeah, of course, if you do. It's late for you on the East Coast. Thank you.
Yeah, this is precious. I happened to be having dinner with the president of my congregation shortly after the Pope happened to go to the synagogue. First Pope to ever enter a synagogue. All right. So he said, her brother was there, and he said, something very strange happened. And so she said, well, what? He says, well, the other day I received a package, and this package had a chemistry set. And it was a chemistry for a 12-year-old. And I couldn't believe it. I said, I know my mother's 90, he was 65. She must have lost her wits. I can't believe it. So I called her and I said, Mom, did you really send this? She said, yes, I did. And do you know that it's a chemistry set for a child? Yes, I know. Well, why did you do it? He says, don't you remember when you were 12 years old, you wanted a chemistry set? Yes, that I remember. Don't you remember what your father said? He said, no, I don't remember. Your father said, when the Pope goes to shul, when the Pope goes to synagogue, I'll send you a chemistry set. And lo and behold, he got this chemistry set. Is that a story?
Fantastic. Oh, it's great. I have a couple of things. First of all, praise and thanks to you, the people are relaying. But another, Susie Weissman, you ask a great question. Since Vatican II, what has the Jewish Orthodox response been to the Catholic apology?
On the whole, very positive. In fact, you have a group of Orthodox rabbis in Israel who responded very positively, saying definitely that they want dialogue. You have a yearly dialogue between the Pontifical Commission for Relations with the Jews and the Orthodox Rabbinate. We've spoken about this. In fact, David Rosen, God bless him, wonderful man, really a wonderful man, is sort of less the shepherd of that. He's the one that coordinates the chief rabbinate in Israel and their group with the Vatican. You do have a number of groups in the United States that meet with the Bishops' Conference. For example, McManus, remember you saw his speech. Well, McManus is on there and he is working assiduously to build relationships with various synagogue organizations and so forth. But the most important thing is that the changes that John Paul II built on, the biblical document, the new catechism, the various important relationships with Israel are there. In other words, they're there. They're not reversible, you see.
Yeah. All right. I'm so grateful to you. I'll tell you that at length tomorrow. I'm so grateful to you. Thank you so much. And John.
Listen, I'm grateful. I was tempted when Wendy gave me that great introduction. I was tempted to say, well, wait a minute. You shouldn't give such an introduction. Because if I really am talking nonsense and I fall flat on my face, everybody will say, what Wendy is saying is all wrong. But on the other hand, if I really say something that means something, say, we don't need that introduction. He's convinced us without it.
That's right. You don't need the advertising. That's very true.
Thank you so much.
Of
Ron, it's a
course.
pleasure, really a pleasure.
Thank
Take
you.
care.
Please don't go anywhere for a moment. I just want to thank you sincerely. I'm so grateful to you. There's never a conversation, we have many, in which I don't learn from you. Never. There's never a conversation in which I don't have a pen in my right hand because I'm writing some citation, something you said, you must read. Ron, you must read this. And I have a list and I have a library. So you're a wonderful man. And what a gift, not only that we had John Paul II in our world, but that you were a conduit for his teachings as well.
Thank you so much.
Of course. And what a gift that you're teaching in the Angelicum, teaching young priests Judaism. It's just wonderful.
Well, it's a joy to have even part of the faculty in my classes, which is always nice.
Oh, fantastic. And you're back there in May teaching again.
I'll be there in May, and then I'll be teaching Maimonides this next fall.
So when do you retire? 95?
If I live. Johnny insists that I have to live till 95, so I have to work at it.
Okay. All right, fine. Eat well.
Okay. With that we do, because of her. With that we do. Thanks so much.
Wendy enjoyed us.
Wendy, thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Rabbi, for such a meaningful and enlightening talk. You've given us so much to think about.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
We're really grateful to you for sharing your wisdom, your insight with us, and it was a true privilege to have you here tonight.
It's my pleasure. Thank you, Wendy. You've been wonderful. And really, what you're doing is a great, great job in actually organizing these lectures. You're a blessing to so many people. Thank you.
Thank you.
Take care.
We really did learn so much from you tonight, and we appreciate all the time you spent with us, especially coming from back east. So thank you for staying with us. I'd like to invite everyone to join us at our next Rabbi in Residence program on February 17th, when we'll have Rabbi David Wolpe from Sinai Temple speak to us on confronting anti-Semitism. We'll hear about the alarming number of anti-Semitic incidents that are happening across the country, how they're being addressed, and how we can speak out against extremism and anti-Semitism. It will be a riveting and powerful talk, so we hope you can all join us. Be sure to mark your calendars for the third Thursday of the month for our insightful and inspiring presentations. You can find us on our website at vosla.org, and please contact me if you would like to sponsor a rabbi. We look forward to seeing you next month, and thank you so much all for coming tonight. I wish you all a wonderful evening. Good night.
Thank you, Wendy. One quick thing I want to say. It's not a rabbi in residence, but one of the friends and colleagues of Rabbi Jack and myself on the CIU board is a Muslim giant, an incredible man by the name of S.A. Ibrahim. I posted his bio on Facebook. Have a read, another extraordinary thinker and doer in the world. And he'll be with me in conversation, a Muslim-Jewish dialogue, next Thursday night. So I look forward to seeing all of you then. Take care. Be well. Stay healthy. Good night.